Welcome to Short Movie Channel. The movie starts with a woman named Catherine opening her eyes in a hospital, facing a nurse named Sandy. The nurse is holding a board with the alphabet on it, trying to communicate with Catherine. That's because Catherine has suffered severe injuries and is unresponsive to everything around her. Sandy begins saying the letters one by one, and Catherine blinks at the letter she wants. Eventually, Catherine spells out the word murder, and Sandy realizes that someone tried to kill her. We then flash back 5 weeks earlier, to the first day Catherine was admitted to the hospital. Sally is there, asking Catherine if she can move her left eye, but she doesn't respond. Sandy tells her that Catherine suffered major trauma to her brain, resulting in severe brain damage, and she had been in a coma for 3 days. Sandy adds that tests show she's expected to improve over time, and she promises to stay by her side and never give up until she sees a response. As Sandy leaves Catherine's room, she meets a girl named Lina. We learn that Lina is Catherine's adopted daughter. They sit together in the hospital cafe, and Sandy explains that Catherine has something called locked-in syndrome. She describes it as a condition where a person loses the ability to move their limbs, and that she, as a neurologist, will keep monitoring Catherine's condition closely. At the same time, Sandy asks Lina how she can be both Catherine's adopted daughter and also married to Catherine's adopted son, Jimmy. Lina then starts telling the story of her, Catherine, and Jimmy. We go back 13 years in time. Back then, Catherine was a very famous movie star, married to Jimmy's father, a very wealthy man. Catherine was devastated when her husband died and left everything he owned to Jimmy, who was only 10 years old at the time. This, of course, made Catherine resent Jimmy deeply. Around that same time, Lina's mother passed away. Since her mom was a close friend of Catherine's, Catherine decided to adopt Lina and have her live with her and Jimmy under the same roof. Lina says she was shocked when Jimmy started having epileptic seizures. She got scared at first, but Catherine calmed her down and taught her what to do when those seizures happened again. Eventually, the seizure passed and Jimmy was okay. Later that night, Catherine went out to meet a friend and told Lina that since her husband passed, she had stepped away from the movie industry. She also shared how Jimmy often used his illness to guilt her into staying by his side and taking care of him, which pulled her away from her career and cost her her fame. Over time, Lina grew closer to Jimmy and started taking care of him. They eventually fell deeply in love, even though Lina was older than Jimmy. She felt compassion for him and decided to stay by his side forever. Lina stayed with Jimmy as they both grew up, and eventually, Jimmy proposed to her. On the day of their wedding, Catherine was very upset. She believed Lina was only after Jimmy's inheritance, and that once they got married, Lina would kick her out of the house. During the wedding, Jimmy had a seizure and collapsed. A doctor named Robert rushed in and took him to his room. We find out that Robert is the family doctor and has been overseeing Jimmy's treatment all along. After Jimmy recovered, Robert told him to keep taking the painkillers he prescribed regularly. 10 years passed since Lina and Jimmy got married. Lina shares that Jimmy's health got worse and he developed multiple conditions because of all the painkillers he was taking. She says Jimmy always insisted she stay with him in his room and never leave him alone, but Lina got tired of the situation because she never got to leave the house at all. One day, Lina asked Jim if they could go for a swim in the lake, but he refused and asked her to stay by his side. So, Lina decided to go to the lake anyway without telling him. But when she came back, she found him in a serious condition. He had taken a large number of painkillers. She rushed him to the hospital. Robert followed them to check on Jim. It was clear that Robert was trying to get close to Lina. Coincidentally, Sandy was the nurse taking care of Jim. As soon as she found out that Robert was Jim's doctor, she asked him why he had prescribed such a high dosage of painkillers when Jim's condition didn't require it. Robert cut her off, didn't let her finish her question, took her outside the room, and told her that he was the doctor and she was the nurse, and that she needed to respect boundaries, especially in front of his patients. Sandy replied that Jim was now her patient and that it was her right to discuss the test results she had gathered. A few days later, Lina went to the lake. As she was coming out of the water, she stepped on a nail and hurt her foot. She saw Robert nearby, and he helped her and drove her back home. The next day, Robert and Lina were playing tennis while Jim watched. At that moment, it became obvious that Jim was jealous of Robert, although he didn't show it in front of them. That night, Lina waited until Jim was asleep, then snuck out and met Robert at a bar. After spending the evening together, while they were heading home, Lina asked Robert to stop the car. She got out and walked into an abandoned barn. Robert followed her in, and they shared an intimate moment. The next day, Catherine told Lina that she was having a birthday party that night. Lina was surprised to see that Catherine had invited Robert. During the party, Catherine started talking about her relationship with Lina's mother, saying that Lina's mom was always jealous of her because she was a famous actress. Catherine claimed that she always felt sorry for Lina's mom, and as proof, she said she raised Lina in her home after her mother passed away. Lina was upset by those words, so she got up and left. The next day, Robert met Lina in his car and told her not to let Catherine ruin her life. That night, Lina was in bed with Jim, writing in her diary. She reflected on their emotional relationship, even though Jim still loved her and didn't want her to leave. He also knew she wrote everything in her diary but chose not to read it out of respect. Lina snapped and told him that she felt like a prisoner, that he used his illness to make sure she kept caring for him. Jim replied that he had given her a life she never even dreamed of and that without him, she was nothing. The next day, Lina met with Robert and told him what had happened. Robert got angry and said that if anyone found out about their relationship, he'd lose his job and his medical license, because he had betrayed his patient. Lina asked him to calm down and proposed a plan to get rid of Jim. A few days later, Robert took Jim to the lake, where Lina was already waiting. Jim told her he had a surprise. They would go on a little boat trip. Once on the boat, Robert took them to a remote spot. On the other side of the lake, there were some workers cutting wood. Robert used this as a distraction and waved at them. At the same time, he dropped an oar into the lake as if by accident. Then, he pretended to reach for it, tipping the boat so they all fell into the water. Robert knew Jim couldn't swim. He dove under the water, grabbed Jim's leg, and pulled him down to drown him. Jim tried to grab Lina's hand to save himself, but she let him go. As soon as Lina and Robert surfaced, they acted like they were searching for Jim, making it look like a tragic accident. The workers on the other shore saw everything and could testify. After the incident, Lina started having nightmares and couldn't sleep. When she met Robert again, he gave her some sleeping pills to help her rest. He then told her they needed to leave town and asked her to sell the house so they could use the money to move away and start fresh. At that point, Lina realized that Robert had tricked her, pretending to love her just to take her property. She refused and told him she'd never sell the house. Then Robert pulled out her diary and threatened to turn it over to the police. He said she had written in it that she wished Jim were dead so she could be free of the suffering, using it as proof that she had planned his murder. Lina freaked out, got out of the car, and walked away. She went back home and started looking for Catherine to tell her everything. But she was shocked to find that Robert had beaten her there. She then caught him with Catherine in an intimate moment, and realized that Robert had tricked both of them, pretending to love them to steal their wealth. Lina went up to her room and started packing to leave. When she ran into Catherine, Catherine tried to stop her, but Lina slapped her, accused her of betrayal, and left. Robert ran after her, trying to explain, but Lina refused to talk. He grabbed her and tried to force her back into the house. Lina resisted, ran away, and hid in the storage room. Robert and Catherine chased after her and tried to open the door, but it was locked. Robert attempted to climb in through the window, but Lina stabbed him with a sharp object and ran out. Robert then told Catherine to go after Lina and stop her, because she was going to report them to the police. At that moment, Lina went over to the gun cabinet, grabbed a rifle, and headed back. Catherine was right behind her, and they got into a serious fight. Catherine managed to take the rifle from Lina and pushed her down the stairs. But Lina got up, ran out of the house, and kept running through the woods. Catherine chased after her on horseback. At the same time, Robert treated his injury, got in his car, and followed them. Catherine caught up with Lina and pointed the rifle at her. Back to the present, Sandy gets a phone call. We find out that Catherine's condition has improved and she's starting to respond to what's happening around her. She grabs the letterboard. We then return to the opening scene, where Lina is standing at the door of Catherine's room, watching everything unfold. Lina quickly leaves the hospital and meets up with Robert. She tells him everything that happened. That's when we learn that it was Robert who hit Catherine with his car to try and kill her. Lina tells Robert they need to find a solution before Catherine tells Sandy everything. Robert suggests they kidnap Catherine from the hospital and take her back home. Meanwhile, Sandy is calling the police. At the same time, Robert and Lina sneak into the hospital, head to Catherine's room, put her in a wheelchair, and take her out to the car. They drive her home. Sandy's mom sees them as they're leaving, but she can't do anything to stop them. Back at the house, Robert explains to Lina that patients like Catherine could suddenly suffer a brain stroke and die. He says he can take advantage of that and prepare a special drug mixture to inject into Catherine. He claims the mixture will cause a fatal brain clot, and no one would be able to detect it in her system, because she's already been on tons of medications during her hospital stay. Lina asks what they'll tell the police. Robert says they'll claim Catherine fell off her horse, got hit by a speeding car that drove off, and that Nurse Sandy had cleared her to leave the hospital. Then, once Catherine got home, she had a stroke and died. Lina tells him the story won't convince the police. But Robert replies that there's no evidence to prove otherwise. While they're talking, Sandy texts Lina and tells her that Catherine confessed everything, that she was trying to save Lina during the incident, and that's why Robert ran her over with the car. Lina gets nervous and asks Robert to check the car carefully so the police won't find any evidence proving he hit Catherine. Robert agrees and heads outside to inspect the car. The moment he leaves, Lina calls Sandy. Sandy tells her that Catherine tried to stop Robert from killing her. We flash back to the day of the incident. Catherine had pointed the rifle at Lina but couldn't bring herself to shoot. At the same time, she saw Robert chasing Lina in his car, trying to kill her. So Catherine shot at him to stop him. The car almost flipped, but Robert regained control and kept going. The sound of the gunfire startled the horse, which threw Catherine off. She hit her head, got dizzy, but still ran after Lina to try and save her from Robert. On the road, Robert saw her and deliberately ran her over with his car to finish her off. Back in the present, Lina feels guilty. Robert returns after cleaning the car. Lina quickly ends the call with Sandy before Robert overhears anything. Robert goes back to preparing the drug mixture. Lina secretly grabs a knife, planning to kill him, but she hesitates and can't go through with it. Just as Robert finishes the drug and approaches Catherine to inject her, Lina tells him she wants to be the one to do it, so she can get her revenge. The moment Robert hands her the syringe, she injects it into his neck. Robert collapses but tells her the dose isn't enough to kill him. He refills the syringe with the drug and moves toward Catherine again. Lina pulls out the knife and stabs him, killing him. Right after that, Sandy arrives with the police and an ambulance. Lina asks Sandy what she'll tell the police. But Sandy stays silent and doesn't respond. And that's how the movie ends. If you liked the film, give us a thumbs up and tell us what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel.